word apocalypse, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Giant explosions? Hordes of zombies? You know, the end of, well, everything? For decades, that's exactly the vision we've been given, especially in pop culture. But what if that explosive ending isn't really the point of the story at all? Yeah, chilling, right? That line is from the classic 1973 movie, Soylent Green. It's a story about a future so wrecked by overpopulation and pollution that, well, people resort to horrifying things. It is a perfect gut-punch example of how we imagine the apocalypse, a really dark future where humanity has just gone way, way too far. And you know who absolutely loves a good catastrophe? Hollywood. The bigger the disaster, the better the blockbuster, right? The whole genre is really built on this epic spectacle, and it taps into this weirdly fascinating, maybe even primal, urge to see our world just get completely taken apart. I mean, we've all seen it. Think of a movie like 2012. You've got these massive tidal waves crashing over the Himalayas, and iconic landmarks like the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio just crumbling into dust. It's the ultimate what-if scenario, just blown up to a global scale. But our imagination for how it all goes down, it doesn't stop with natural disasters, not even close.
It turns out, we have a pretty vast and, honestly, creative menu for our own destruction. It's kind of like a permanent writing prompt for storytellers. And they've been answering it for decades, in every way you can imagine. Books, movies, you name it.
We've basically got a whole buffet of doomsday scenarios. And what's really interesting is that each one tells you a little something about what people were worried about at the time it was made. So, let's do a quick tour, shall we?
Sometimes the threat comes from way out there. Take aliens, for example. In The Hitchhiker's Guide, Earth is just demolished. No big fight, no epic battle. It's just unceremoniously destroyed by some bureaucratic alien race to make way for a hyperspace bypass. I mean, talk about cosmic indifference. But let's be honest, more often than not, we imagine the threat comes from right here at home, that we're the ones who mess it all up. In J.G. Ballard's novel, The Burning World, industrial pollution actually stops the oceans from evaporating, which creates this catastrophic planet-wide drought. It's a pretty stark warning about what happens if we ignore our planet. That threat from within can also be biological. And of course, we have to talk about The Walking Dead. It gave us this entire world just completely overrun by zombies after a virus gets out. But the story was never really just about survival, was it? It was about the total breakdown of society and what we all become when the old rules just don't apply anymore.
So we've gone from threats inside our bodies to threats from our own creations. In the Terminator movies, the AI, Skynet, wakes up, becomes self-aware, and basically decides that humanity is the real problem. So it launches a nuclear war to wipe us all out. That is our classic, deep-seated fear of technology turning against us. And that brings us to maybe the most chillingly realistic fear of the 20th century, nuclear war. Back in 1983, a TV movie called The Day After showed this incredibly grim, unflinching vision of what life would be like after a nuclear exchange. Get this, over 100 million people watched it. That made it the highest-rated TV film in history. Okay, so we've run through all these ways the world could end. Explosions, disease, killer robots, it's all about destruction. But what if I told you that for centuries, we've had the whole idea of apocalypse completely and totally wrong? This is where things get really, really interesting. To understand this, we've got to go back to the word's origins, way before Hollywood ever got a hold of it. The word apocalypse actually comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, and it doesn't mean destruction or the end. It means an unveiling, a revelation. Think of it like pulling back a curtain to finally see a truth that was hidden the whole time. So you've got this huge contrast, right? On one hand, we think it means the final act, the end of the entire story. But what it originally meant was the disclosure of something crucial, the beginning of a whole new understanding. It's kind of amazing how much a word's meaning can change over time. So, how do we connect these two ideas, the total destruction we see in movies and this idea of an unveiling? Well, maybe even our modern explosive apocalyptic stories are a kind of revelation after all. Not a revelation of some grand cosmic truth, but of a very, very human one. Here's the key. These stories are actually a form of social critique. They aren't really about the future. They're about right now. They take our current anxieties, about our technology, about the environment, about our politics, and they just crank the volume up to 11, to a world-ending scale to force us to actually look at them. Let's look at some examples.
In Wall-E, an Earth that's buried in garbage isn't just a cool sci-fi setting, it unveils our very real fears about unchecked consumerism. The Day After wasn't just a scary movie, it unveiled the terrifying everyday anxiety of Cold War politics. And in a story like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, the bleak, empty world unveils our deepest fear. What happens when everything we've built, our culture, our knowledge, our morality, is just gone?
So what's the big takeaway here? If these stories aren't just about blowing stuff up, what are they really trying to do? What should we get from our collective obsession with the end of the world? I really love this idea, which is adapted from an analysis of the author Kurt Vonnegut. Apocalyptic stories aren't necessarily pessimistic. They're actually a kind of warning. By showing us the absolute worst-case scenario of the path we're on, they're passionately, even desperately arguing for us to choose a different one.
So in the end, the apocalypse isn't just an ending. It is an unveiling. It peels back the surface of our normal, everyday lives and forces us to look at the really big questions. It makes us confront our relationship with our world, with our own creations, and, ultimately, with each other.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. If you look at the doomsday stories we're telling right now, all the ones about climate change or pandemics or social collapse, what are they unveiling about us? What hidden truths about our own time are they trying to show us? Maybe before it's too late.
What if they're actually trying to tell us something super important about right now? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into. So to really get what's going on here, we have to start with the word itself. Because, get this, our whole modern idea of an apocalypse is, well, it's based on a huge misunderstanding. Yeah, the word doesn't actually mean the end. It literally means an unveiling, a revelation, something being revealed. All right, so it's the end, or is it? I mean, of course, that's not what jumps into our heads, right? When you and I hear the word apocalypse, we think of something way more, well, destructive. We've got this whole shared vision of what the end is supposed to look like. And we can thank decades of movies, books, and video games for that. I mean, just look at this list. It feels pretty familiar, doesn't it? You've got the zombie hordes from The Walking Dead, the terrifying nuclear fallout in a classic like On the Beach, or, Skynet's robots deciding humanity has to go in The Terminator. It's this picture of total, absolute collapse. That's the apocalypse we all know from pop culture. So, the original apocalypse and unveiling. Okay, now for the cool part. Let's peel back that pop culture layer for a second and dig into the original meaning. We're gonna look at where this word actually came from, because honestly, it tells a completely different story. So here it is. The word comes from the Greek apocalypsis, and its Latin version, revelatio, which is exactly where we get the name for the Book of Revelation. See the connection? So an apocalypse isn't a thing that happens, like a meteor strike. It's the act of revealing a truth, something that was hidden right in front of us the whole time. It's literally like pulling back the curtain to see what's really going on. And this is so important. This was actually a genre of hope for people who were being oppressed. Think about that. Early apocalyptic writing, like the Book of Revelation, wasn't designed to scare people. Not at all. It was a message of hope. It was meant to unveil this deeper truth to communities that were really suffering, telling them, hey, hang in there. Despite everything you're going through, there's a divine plan, and in the end, things will be set right. So look at this contrast. It's just wild. Back then, it meant a divine unveiling of truth and hope. And now, it means a global catastrophe, the end of the world. So the big question is, how on earth did we get from A to B? How did a word about revelation turn into a word about total ruin? Okay, next up, from prophecy to pop culture. Well, that whole transformation, it didn't happen overnight. It happened over centuries, and it happened because our fears changed. It turns out our stories about the end of the world have always been a mirror, reflecting back whatever society was most afraid of at the time. And this timeline just lays it all out. It's pretty fascinating, right? You start in ancient times, and the fears are huge. Cosmic things, divine judgment, good versus evil. Then, boom, fast forward to the 1950s. The Cold War is on, and suddenly all our stories are about nuclear annihilation. Then you get to the 70s, and we're worried about the planet, so we get movies like Soylent Green. And now, well, it's all about pandemics, zombies, societal collapse. It's so clear. Our apocalypses always change to match our anxieties. This evolution has led us to something different. something experts are calling a secular apocalypse. Basically, it's retelling that classic biblical story. But, and this is the key part, without God or anything transcendent. The perfect case study for this, the disaster flick 2012. I mean, it's got all the pieces. A massive cataclysm, a handful of people who get saved, but one major ingredient is just gone. And that's God. And listen, the movie is not subtle about this at all. Just look at these scenes. The crack in the Sistine Chapel, it splits right between the fingers of God and Adam. The giant Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio crumbles. You've got cardinals literally crushed while they're praying. The message couldn't be clearer. In this version of the apocalypse, faith gets you nowhere. It's all about science and human know-how. All right, a mirror to ourselves. So if these stories aren't really just about the world ending, and we know they reflect our current fears, then what's the point? What are they actually doing for us? And that brings us to this really cool idea of the apocalypse as a form of social critique, which really gets us to the heart of it, doesn't it? Why are we so obsessed with the end of the world? I mean, why do we tell these stories again and again and again? What is it about watching our own civilization crumble on screen that we find so compelling? Well, the answer might be in this kind of mind-bending idea from literary theory. The quote says, "They're a way of transforming our own present into the determinate past of a future." Okay, what does that even mean? Put simply, these stories aren't trying to predict the future. Nope, they're giving us a powerful way to look at our own society right now. By imagining a future that looks back on our time as the past, we get to see all our own flaws and values way more clearly. And once you start looking for the social critique, you see it everywhere. Take WALL-E. It's not just a sweet story about a robot, is it? It's a blistering critique of our throwaway culture and what we're doing to the planet. Or think about the amazing but brutal novel The Road. It's all about asking, what happens to our sense of right and wrong once society is gone? Even a book like The Book of Enoch uses a future world to poke holes in rigid, controlling belief systems. It's brilliant. And the way they do this is so clever. They focus on what's left behind, the post-apocalyptic remains of our world. You know, what actually survives the big collapse. Maybe it's a can of soda, a half-remembered song, a tattered book, or just an idea about how to treat people. By showing us what future characters fight for, or what they cherish from our time, these stories hold up a mirror and force us to see what's actually important, or super dangerous, about the way we live right now. Okay, so what the end reveals. Man, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? We started with this pretty standard idea of the apocalypse, and well, we've uncovered something way, way deeper. Let's just quickly recap our journey here. We started at step 1, seeing the apocalypse as just a global catastrophe, fire and brimstone. Then we dug deeper and found step 2, its original meaning as a divine unveiling, a message of hope. And finally, that brought us to step 3, understanding these stories as a social mirror, a really powerful tool for looking at ourselves. So here's the takeaway. The next time you sit down to watch a zombie movie or you pick up a post-apocalyptic book, you'll have a whole new way of looking at it. You can start asking different questions. It stops being about who's going to survive and starts being about what is this story really trying to say about us. And that really leaves us with one final big question. If all our stories about the end of the world are actually about today, then the most important question isn't how is it all going to end? The real question is, what is our apocalypse trying to unveil about us? Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving deep into one of the biggest, oldest ideas out there, the apocalypse. From ancient scrolls all the way to the biggest summer blockbusters. We're gonna unpack what it all means, where it actually came from, and let's be honest, why we just can't get enough of the end of the world. I mean, it's a real question, right? Because if you look at our screens, it feels like we are absolutely surrounded by visions of our own doom. Just think about it. We have imagined our own end in so many different ways. Let's start with the big one, the modern classic, the zombie apocalypse. It's everywhere. The idea has become such a huge part of our culture that it's basically shorthand for society completely falling apart. And then there's the one that hits a little too close to home these days, pandemics. You see it in books and movies all the time. Stories that tap into this, really primal fear of a plague that wipes us all out. It can feel, well, a little too real sometimes. Of course, for a whole other generation, the big nightmare wasn't some virus, it was the bomb. The idea of nuclear winter. Movies came out that absolutely terrified people by showing this grim, gray, awful reality of what the world would look like after a nuclear war. And hey, if we're not the ones causing our own destruction, there's always the classic sci-fi scenario. Aliens are going to do it for us. Sometimes it's scary, and other times, well, sometimes it's just cosmic paperwork for a new hyperspace bypass. So yeah, the point is, these stories are absolutely everywhere. We're talking comics, video games, TV shows, movies. We are just constantly consuming stories about civilization collapsing. It is a full-blown pop culture obsession. But here's where we take a turn. What if I told you that our whole modern idea of an apocalypse, all the fire and brimstone and zombies, is actually a massive misunderstanding of what the word originally meant? To get it, we need to go way, way back. Yeah, to really find the truth here, we have to go back to the source. See, the whole concept of an apocalypse didn't start in a Hollywood writer's room. It started as this really powerful kind of religious writing. Okay, and this right here, this is the key to the whole thing. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apocalypsis. And it doesn't mean catastrophe. It doesn't mean the end of everything. It literally means an unveiling, a revelation. It's about pulling back a curtain to show you a truth that's been hidden the whole time. I mean, this quote just completely flips our modern view on its head. See, the original apocalyptic books, like the Book of Revelation, they weren't just scary bedtime stories. They were written for people who were suffering, to give them hope. The message was basically, look, things are terrible right now, and they might even get worse. But don't despair, there's a bigger plan, and in the end, justice will win. So the big question is, how in the world did we get from a hopeful unveiling to, cities on fire? Well, it's pretty simple. As the idea moved out of religion and into mainstream culture, the meaning got twisted. We basically kept all the cool explosions, but threw out the original theology. And this right here shows you exactly what happened. In the original version, God is front and center. It's all about a divine plan. But you look at a modern disaster flick, and God has been completely erased from the picture. In fact, one source points out that in some of these movies, the characters who stop to pray are the first ones to go. Survival is all about science and human grit. The divine part of the equation is just gone. So once we took God out of the driver's seat, we were left to imagine all the ways we could end ourselves. And wow, did our imaginations run wild. We've come up with a seriously impressive list of ways for it all to go wrong. Here's just a quick rundown of our modern fears. We're worried about aliens from outer space. We're worried about what we're doing to our own planet. We're worried about creating a super plague. And of course, we're worried about our own technology, like a rogue AI finally deciding it's had enough of us. And this is the most important part. In this new godless apocalypse, the blame shifts. It's not some divine judgment day anymore. It's us. We become the authors of our own destruction, whether it's because we polluted the planet, built technology we couldn't control, or just got too arrogant for our own good. Which brings us right back to where we started. If these stories aren't really about God's plan anymore, then what are they for? Why do we keep telling them? What are they really about? Now, I know this quote sounds a little academic, but I love it. What he's basically saying is that these stories about the future aren't really about the future. They're a really clever trick we use to look at our own world right now, but from a safe distance, like we're survivors looking back at the old world. And that is the final amazing piece of the puzzle. It turns out our modern apocalypse stories are doing the exact same thing the ancient ones did. They are an unveiling. But instead of revealing God's grand plan, they're revealing us. They're pulling back the curtain on our own collective fears about technology, about society, about the planet, and about where we're all headed. So the next time you're watching a zombie show or reading a post-apocalyptic book, ask yourself this: what is this story really unveiling? What fear about our world right now is it holding up to the light? Because in the end, it seems like all of our stories about the end of the world are actually stories about the world we're living in today. Thanks for joining me. Let's be honest, we have a little bit of an obsession. I mean, look at our books, our movies, our games. We just can't seem to stop imagining the end of the world. From zombie hordes to killer robots, we are absolutely fascinated with the apocalypse. But why? You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You've got these stories of a few survivors trying to make their way through a world overrun by zombies, where, the biggest threat often isn't the dead, but the other living people. Or how about this classic? A future where a super smart AI decides humanity has to go, triggers a nuclear holocaust, and then sends killer robots back in time just to make sure the job gets done. It's not all big action, though. Some of the most powerful stories are the really quiet ones, like a father and son just trying to survive, walking through this bleak, gray, ash-covered world after, we don't even know what happened. And then sometimes the end of the world is weirdly adorable. I mean, a story about a lonely little trash compactor robot cleaning up a planet that we totally wrecked and abandoned, who then ends up saving us from ourselves. So yeah, that brings us right back to the big question. What is it about watching society totally collapse that we find so captivating? You might just think it's some dark fascination, but the real answer? It's been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right in the word we use for all of it. Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, we need to take a closer look at that word we throw around all the time, apocalypse. It turns out its meaning today is a long, long way from where it started. Right now, when you and I hear apocalypse, this is what pops into our heads. Total destruction, the end of everything. And a lot of that comes from the Bible's Book of Revelation, with all its images of giant disasters and final judgment. So yeah, no wonder we think it just means disaster. And this is the whole key right here. The original Greek word apocalypsis doesn't actually mean end. It means an unveiling, a revelation. It's about something hidden finally being brought into the light. So these stories aren't just about the world ending, they're about something being revealed to us. Okay, so if these stories are really unveilings, then the next question is obvious. What exactly are they unveiling? Well, the answer is us. Or more specifically, our anxieties. Apocalyptic fiction is like a giant mirror, reflecting back the biggest fears of whatever era it was made in. Let's start with a big one from the 20th century. After the dawn of the atomic age and all through the Cold War, the fear of complete and total nuclear annihilation was very, very real. It was on everyone's mind. And you can see it everywhere in the stories from that time. They are just soaked in this fear. They were all unveiling our collective terror of the bomb, from the slow, grim reality of the aftermath and on the beach to the absolute shock of watching the day after on TV. Now, as the Cold War started to cool down, a different kind of anxiety began to creep into the spotlight. What if the end didn't come with a bang from a bomb, but with a whimper from us just neglecting our own planet? And just like that, the focus of our end-of-the-world stories started to shift. They began unveiling our growing fears about pollution, about overpopulation, about running out of resources. You see it in the global drought of the burning world, or famously in the horrifying secret of Soylent Green. These stories revealed a deep-seated worry that we were literally destroying our own home. Of course, there's another fear, one that's way older, way more primal, and it's never really gone away: the fear of disease. The idea that some unstoppable plague could just come along and wipe civilization off the map. That's a powerful and recurring theme for a reason. So whether it's a genetically engineered virus or a sudden epidemic of blindness that makes society totally fall apart, or, a plague that brings the dead back to life, all these stories are unveiling our terror of biological collapse and what we become when all the rules just disappear. So it's pretty clear these stories unveil our fears, but they're actually doing something even smarter than that. They aren't really trying to predict the future. They're using the idea of the future as a tool to say something about the present. There's this really cool idea from a cultural critic named Frederick Jameson that totally nails it. He says that by showing us a ruined future, these stories force us to look back at our own time, at today, as a period in history, the period that caused all that ruin. It's a way of making us see our own world with fresh and kind of critical eyes. Let's go back to WALL-E for a second. It's the perfect example. On the surface, it's this super cute story about a robot finding love, but the unveiling, the thing it's revealing, is a really sharp critique of our society. The whole reason Earth is a trash heap is because of this one giant corporation, by and large, that pushed this insane culture of consumerism. The story is a warning about problems we are dealing with right now, just projected into the future. So these stories reveal our fears, and they critique our society. But they go one level deeper still. By showing us the end of everything, they end up revealing something absolutely fundamental about what it even means to be human. Think about it. When you strip away all the laws, the governments, the technology, all the stuff that holds civilization together, what's left? That is the real question at the heart of these stories. They become these intense explorations of morality, of love, of cruelty, of hope. They make us ask what really defines us when everything else is gone. The end of the world is basically the ultimate stage for the human drama. So just remember, our apocalypses are almost never really about destruction. They're unveilings. They reveal our deepest fears, they criticize our present, and they explore what it means to be human. Which leaves us with one last thought. The next time you watch a movie about the end of the world, ask yourself, what is the story really trying to reveal about us right now?
All right, let's just dive right into this. You know, tucked away in the very first book of the Bible, there's a story that is so strange and so brief that most of us just read right past it. But it's a story about fallen angels, forbidden knowledge, and a world that got corrupted not just by sin, but by secrets. This is the story of the Watchers. So the whole mystery kicks off with this one really perplexing phrase. The book of Genesis mentions a group called the Sons of God. But who were they exactly? The Bible doesn't really spell it out, but their actions were about to change the entire course of human history and bring about a judgment on a, well, global scale. Now, what's really fascinating here is just how little information we're actually given. Genesis 6 introduces these beings, tells us they are children with human women, mentions these giants called the Nephilim, and then that's it. The story just moves on. It's an incredible cliffhanger that has left people scratching their heads for millennia, asking, wait, what was the full story here?
And you know, this isn't just a puzzle for us today. The vagueness of this passage created an enigma that ancient people were just as desperate to solve as we are. They wanted to fill in the blanks. They needed to understand what this heavenly transgression was all about.
So here's the key thing to remember. The standard biblical text itself just doesn't give us the answers. To really get to the bottom of this ancient mystery, we have to look beyond the pages we're familiar with, to books that were lost, hidden, and for a long, long time, forbidden.
So where do we find these answers? Well, the story really picks up in the 20th century, with what has to be one of the most important archaeological discoveries of all time. This is where we start to find the missing pieces.
It's 1947, and some Bedouin shepherds literally stumble upon these clay jars in the caves of Qumran, and inside, the Dead Sea Scrolls, an absolute treasure trove of ancient Jewish texts, many of which no one had laid eyes on for nearly 2,000 years. And right there, in that lost library, we find the missing parts of our puzzle.
But you know, these texts didn't just hand over simple answers on a silver platter. As this quote shows, discovering the scrolls just opened up a whole new world of debate. This isn't some settled history, it's a live, ongoing investigation into our past. And that just shows you how deep this mystery really goes.
Now, among all these incredible texts, one of the most important is the Book of Enoch. And while you won't find it in most Bibles today, back in antiquity, it was a hugely influential book. And its claim? It claims to tell the full story of Genesis 6, the story that the Bible only hints at.
So what does Enoch tell us? It reveals that these sons of God weren't just any old angels. No, they were a specific, high-ranking order with a very special name, the Watchers. And their sin? Well, it was far greater than anyone could have imagined. The Book of Enoch lays it all out. It says 200 of these Watchers, led by an angel named Shemhaza, they all got together and made a pact. They descended from their posts up in heaven, driven by lust for human women, and just completely abandoned their sacred duty.
And that seems like the main thing, right? Angels leaving heaven for women, that's a big deal. But the Book of Enoch says, hold on, that was only the beginning of the crime. The far, far greater sin was what they decided to teach their new partners.
And this is the absolute heart of the story. The Watchers didn't just sin with their bodies. They sinned by sharing divine secrets. They gave humanity knowledge it was never, ever meant to have. And in doing so, they basically shattered the barrier between heaven and earth. I mean, just take a second to look at this list of so-called rejected mysteries. It's such a wild mix. On the one hand, you've got this really powerful stuff, like sorcery and how to make weapons, things that obviously fueled the violence that was about to consume the world. But then you have things that seem almost trivial, right? Cosmetics and jewelry. The text even names the angel, Aziel, who specifically taught women how to make eye paint and craft ornaments. The idea was this would help them seduce even more angels and corrupt humanity through vanity.
So, what happened when humanity got its hands on all these secrets? Did it lead to some great enlightenment? Nope. According to the story, it led to total and complete corruption.
This right here sets up such a fascinating contrast. You see, the Book of Enoch talks about two kinds of heavenly knowledge. The prophet Enoch, he gets taken up to heaven and shown the real secrets of the cosmos, things like astronomy and meteorology, and that leads to wisdom. But the knowledge the Watchers give to women, it's all earthy. It's focused on vanity, violence, magic. The book creates this really clear gendered split. Men get divine wisdom, while women get these corrupting secrets. The result was an absolute catastrophe. Armed with the knowledge of how to make metal, humans forged swords and shields, and suddenly, war was everywhere. Adorned with cosmetics and jewelry, vanity and lust just spread like wildfire. The world became so violent, so corrupt, that divine intervention was the only answer. This forbidden knowledge from the Watchers is presented as the direct cause of the Great Flood.
Now, this is such a powerful, detailed story. It explains so much. Which leads to the big question, why isn't it better known? Why isn't this part of the biblical canon? You know, the official collection of accepted scriptures.
And here's the crucial thing. For a long time, it wasn't forgotten at all. As modern scholars point out, for the first few hundred years, early Christian writers and communities treated the Book of Enoch as scripture. They saw it as an absolutely essential text for understanding their world.
And why was it so important? Well, because it answered one of the biggest questions in all of theology. Where does evil come from? The story of the Watchers gave a very clear answer. Evil wasn't something humans invented. It was like a foreign technology, a set of forbidden secrets that were introduced into the world by these rebellious divine beings.
But, over time, the theological tides began to shift. Really influential thinkers like Augustine, writing around the 4th and 5th centuries, started to argue against this idea. He totally rejected the notion of angels physically procreating with women, basically calling those stories fables. And as other explanations for evil, like the whole Adam and Eve story, became more popular, the story of the Watchers got pushed to the sidelines, and eventually was left out of most versions of the Bible. And that really brings us to our final thought. The story of the Watchers is this powerful reminder that the texts we have today are just one part of a much larger, much more complex conversation that was happening in the ancient world. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible stories, what other forgotten worlds are just lying in wait, ready to be rediscovered, just beyond the edges of the pages we all think we know so well.